No longer did Kale end each day exhausted. No longer did crowds drain him or arguments linger. He became a container. His presence grew heavier, calmer. Animals lingered near him. Children watched him with wide eyes. And people, some drawn, some wary, felt that something had shifted. "Myra," he asked one evening, "what is it I'm becoming?" She looked at him long, her hands folded over her knees. "You are remembering," she said simply. What we all were before forgetting took root. That night Kale began to dream differently. He stood once again in the chamber of light. This time he approached the hovering sphere. It pulsed with a heartbeat not unlike his own. He reached for it and it did not resist. Instead, it entered him. He woke with a jolt. From that moment his hands tingled. Not always, but in moments of silence, of reverence, they felt alive. He could feel a current, like soft resistance, between his palms. Myra smiled when he told her. "The field is forming," she said. "Now we begin the intermediate path." The intermediate path began with the microcosmic orbit. "It is a Taoist practice," Myra explained. "But you will find it echoed in many places." Kale sat spine straight, breath deep. He focused his attention on the Huiyin point at the base of the spine. He visualized a golden sphere of energy there pulsing. Inhaling slowly, he guided the sphere upward through his spine, sacrum, lumbar, thoracic, cervical, until it reached the crown of his head. Exhaling, he let the sphere descend along the front of his body, brow, throat, chest, navel, until it returned to its origin. He repeated this 9 times. With each cycle, his body felt more aligned, his field more alive. A hum surrounded him like a soft echo of wind in a cave. "Now," Myra said, "you have a current. A river. But rivers overflow without banks. The orbit creates structure, harmony." Days passed in study and practice. Kale began to sense the fields of others. He could feel when someone was depleted, agitated, or scattered. He could tell when a person's energy was luminous or dull, and he began to sense invisible threads, connections, influences, and sometimes attacks. "You are sensitive now," Myra warned. "And sensitivity requires protection." She taught him how to seal his aura. After each practice, Kale visualized a golden sphere forming around his body, a living membrane, shifting and glowing like sunlight on water. He felt it grow denser as his attention settled into his center. This membrane became his shield, not a wall, but a boundary. "Don't hide from the world," Myra said. "Shine, but with clarity." He learned the mirror shield, an advanced form of protection. A layer of reflective energy surrounding his field, returning negative projections without harm. "Like water reflecting the sky," she said. "Effortless, neutral." He learned to walk into rooms and maintain presence, to withdraw his energy when needed, to center even when chaos swirled around him. His life transformed, but with power came responsibility. One evening, a traveler arrived in the village. A woman cloaked in blue, her eyes sharp as obsidian. She watched Kale from afar for hours before finally approaching. "You've opened something," she said without introduction. Kale said nothing. "The field around you," she continued. "It's too stable for someone untrained." "Who's your teacher?" Kale gestured to Myra, who stood quietly nearby watching. The woman nodded. "Good," she said. "She teaches the old ways." Then she reached into her satchel and pulled out a worn scroll. "Read this," she said. "When you're ready, come find me beyond the southern woods. We're gathering again." Kale opened the scroll. Symbols danced across the page, some familiar, some foreign, but all of them felt like echoes of something long forgotten. He looked up. The woman was already gone. Myra stepped beside him. "She was one of us once," she said quietly. "Left to walk her own path. You must decide whether to follow." Kale felt the scroll hum in his hands. He knew. The path was only beginning. The journey of energy had now entered a new phase, one that required not only practice, but integration. Alara, who had felt the stirrings of energy in her body, was no longer the same woman who first stood at the threshold of this hidden path. She had become more centered, more alert, and increasingly aware of how energy moved through her, how it danced with the world around her. With each day of training under the guidance of the elder mystic Thalen, her awareness deepened. Her mornings began in silence, often seated in the grove where the sun pierced gently through the ancient oaks. She would place her hands together, palms slightly apart, and feel for the familiar tingling warmth that now seemed to arrive with less effort. The energy was no longer elusive, it came as a companion, responding to her breath, her focus, and her need. Thalen often reminded her, power is not possession, it is relationship. This truth resonated in her as she practiced the microcosmic orbit each dawn. Inhale, drawing energy from the base of her spine up through her back. Exhale, guiding it down the front of her body to the center below the navel. With time, she could feel the current grow steadier, as though her body had remembered a rhythm lost in generations past. One afternoon, he introduced her to a new practice. The sun hung low, casting golden light across the clearing. Today, Thalen said, placing a smooth stone in her hand, you will learn to direct the energy outward, not to influence but to commune. Alara held the stone. It was unremarkable to the eye, but within her grasp it felt dense, almost alive. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and allowed the energy to rise and collect in her chest. Then with intention, she let it flow down her arms and into her palms. The moment it reached her fingers, she felt a connection spark between herself and the stone. A pulse, a recognition. Feel, don't force, Thalen whispered. Let the object reveal itself. She remained still, breathing evenly. Soon she sensed something beyond the hardness of the stone, a memory of riverbeds, of time, of pressure. It was as if the stone spoke not in words, but in resonance. Later that night, around the fire, Thalen explained, everything remembers. Every object, every tree, every hand that has touched this world carries memory in its field. When your field is coherent, you can listen. You can touch without touching. Alara understood now that the power of the hands was more than projection. It was perception. The energy they emitted revealed the truth of the moment, and the truth within her. The following days were filled with refinement. She began practicing the flow of the three forces. Standing barefoot in the circle of stones Thalen had once called the wheel of balance, she raised her arms skyward. Above her, she imagined a stream of golden energy descending, celestial and vibrant. Beneath her feet, emerald energy pulsed from the earth. She drew both currents into her heart and envisioned a violet light expanding outward, uniting the two. With each repetition, her body began to hum, not audibly, but at a level she felt more than heard. Her skin tingled, her breath became smoother, and her mind clearer. Something deep within her had begun to open. She no longer felt like a vessel alone, but a node in a vast network of energy that pulsed through all living things. As Alara's sensitivity grew, so too did her sense of vulnerability. Crowded places now overwhelmed her. She felt exhausted after casual interactions with those unaware of energy dynamics. One evening, she asked Thalen, how do I stop absorbing so much? I feel like I'm leaking. He nodded knowingly. That means it's time to build your shield. Not to resist the world, but to define yourself within it. He guided her through the mirror shield practice. With slow breath, she visualized her aura forming a protective shell. This shell mirrored energy, reflecting back anything not aligned with her field. As she maintained the visualization, she noticed a change in how she felt, more solid, more herself. But Thalen warned her, protection is not rejection. It's alignment. If you close off completely, you lose connection. The mirror reflects, but it must remain clear. She began to use the technique regularly. Before leaving her home, she would take a moment to seal her energy, whispering the words silently, I am whole, I am sealed, I am present. The results were tangible. Her emotions stabilized. Interactions became less draining. People treated her with quiet reverence without understanding why. Over time, she began to sense the energy fields of others as textures, sharp, heavy, soft, or diffuse. Some people she passed in the village buzzed like erratic wires. Others were cool and heavy like clay. Occasionally, she would cross someone whose field felt still and expansive. These individuals often met her gaze knowingly, and she began to suspect that others like her walked the land in silence. One stormy evening, Thalen brought her to the old temple ruins near the cliffs. The wind clears the air. It is a good night for projection. They stood in the open-air sanctum, wind whipping through broken columns. Thalen set a bowl of water between them. Focus on the flame within you, he said, and extend it through your palm. Stir the surface without touching it. Alara closed her eyes, drew breath to her center, and extended her hand. At first, the water remained still, but after several minutes, the surface began to shimmer, not from the wind, but from the subtle pulses of her intention. She smiled in wonder. I didn't know I could do this. You didn't, Thalen said, but the part of you that remembers did. As weeks passed, Ilara began to sense the energetic threads that connected her to the world around her. When walking near animals, she could feel their moods. When entering a space, she knew instinctively what had occurred there. Joy lingered like sunlight, sorrow like a chill. But with awareness came responsibility. She remembered the words Thalen had spoken on her second night of training. What you awaken, you must care for. Power untended becomes burden. She began integrating energy hygiene practices into her life. Each night before bed, she performed the sealing breath. She would sit in stillness, inhaling all the fragments of energy she had scattered during the day. With each breath, she whispered internally, return, seal, align. This nightly ritual transformed her sleep. Dreams became vivid, purposeful. She received symbols, messages, even guidance from what she called the inner council, a circle of luminous beings who appeared when her mind was quiet and her field coherent. Then came the day of testing. A traveler arrived at the village, fevered and disoriented. None of the local healers could identify the cause. Thalen looked to Ilara. You are ready. See not with your eyes, but with your field. She approached the man, not with fear, but focus. Her hands hovered over his chest. At first, she felt only heat, but then a knot, an area where energy twisted and refused to flow. She didn't try to fix it. Instead, she focused on radiating coherence, drawing the knot into alignment with her steady rhythm. After an hour, the man stirred, his breath calming. Color returned to his cheeks. Thalen watched in silence. When she was done, he simply said, You've stepped across the threshold. Ilara knew then that energy work was no longer something she practiced. It was who she had become. She had felt the energy, shaped it, sealed it, and protected it. She had learned its rhythms, its language, and its sacred laws. But most importantly, she had discovered that the journey wasn't about controlling the energy at all. It was about remembering her essence. For when she aligned with her true self, the energy responded not as a servant, but as a symphony. As the days turned into weeks, Elias began to notice that the world itself seemed to shift around him. His perceptions sharpened. The colors of the forest deepened. The whispers of the wind carried new meanings, and his dreams became clearer, no longer chaotic fragments but flowing messages that felt ancient and wise. Every morning he woke with a sense of quiet purpose, returning again and again to the practices the teacher had shared, sealing energy, centering, building the auric membrane, and directing force with intent. One crisp morning as dawn broke over the eastern hills, Elias sat beneath the grand oak, the tree that had watched over him since his childhood. Its gnarled limbs reached into the sky like ancient arms, and its roots seemed to pulse with the slow rhythmic beat of the earth. It was here, the teacher had said, that he would encounter the next phase of his transformation. Now you will learn how to move energy not just within and around you, the teacher had once told him, but across distance, across time, and into form. The energy you cultivate is not meant to stagnate. It is meant to shape the world. So Elias closed his eyes and breathed deeply. He felt the cool air enter his nostrils, his lungs, and descend into the well of his center just below the navel. From there it spread like ripples in a still pond. As his awareness expanded, he brought his palms together slowly, feeling again the familiar hum, the gentle resistance between them. But today it was stronger, denser, as if the space between his hands held a living presence. He remembered the teacher's words, now you will shape it. Carefully he began to mold the space between his hands into a sphere. It pulsed with warmth and its boundaries became increasingly distinct. This wasn't imagination, it was tactile, real. He charged it with a thought, a clear and radiant image of healing, and directed it to a spot in his body that had been aching for days. The warmth deepened. A tingling spread through his side. The pain receded like mist at sunrise. But this was only the beginning. Later that day, Elias ventured deeper into the forest. He came to a clearing he hadn't seen before, though he had walked these woods since he could walk. In the center stood a circle of standing stones, half buried and weathered by time. A strange sense of reverence filled the air. He stepped into the circle and felt a charge like static race across his skin. The world outside seemed to hush. The space within the circle felt sacred, alive with old energy. He sat in the center and began to practice the microcosmic orbit. With each breath, he drew the energy up his spine, vertebra by vertebra, to the crown of his head, then down the front of his body, returning it to the base. Over and over, like a wheel turning, he circulated the vital force. On the third cycle, something shifted. He felt his awareness stretch beyond the physical. The stones around him vibrated with memory. The trees, once silent observers, now seemed to whisper ancient songs. His breath became wind. His body, earth. His mind, open sky. It was as if he had become the forest, and the forest had become him. In that moment, Elias understood what the teacher had meant by the subtle science, the spiritual technology of the old ways. These were not metaphors. They were real forces hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right level of presence to reveal themselves. When he opened his eyes, he was not alone. A figure stood just outside the circle, draped in robes of deep indigo, embroidered with silver threads that shimmered like stars. Their face was serene, eyes ancient, as though they had watched the turning of 1,000 ages. The teacher had returned. "You have crossed the threshold," the teacher said, voice resonant yet soft. "Now we begin the true work." Elias rose to his feet. He felt taller, more rooted, as if the earth itself lent him strength. "Your field is coherent," the teacher observed. "You hold presence now, not just for yourself but for others. Soon those around you will feel it, even if they do not understand it." They began walking through the forest together, the teacher speaking as they moved. The human energy field is not limited by skin. It extends, reacts, and informs the reality you experience. This is the secret of influence, not manipulation, but coherence. When your inner state is stable and radiant, the world begins to align with your vibration. They came to a stream, and the teacher motioned for Elias to sit. "We will now work with projection, not of will, but of frequency. Choose a leaf from the stream." Elias bent forward, gently lifting a small golden leaf drifting by. "Hold it between your palms, charge it with gratitude. Let your energy infuse it, then return it to the stream and watch." Elias did as instructed. He focused on a memory, his mother's laughter, warm bread, the feel of the soil after rain, and let that vibration move through him into the leaf. When he placed it back in the water, the stream shimmered slightly where it touched. "This," the teacher said, "is how you leave impressions in the subtle world. Every thought, every breath charged with emotion becomes a seed. Most people sow chaos unknowingly. You must learn to sow clarity." In the weeks that followed, Elias practiced daily. He learned to project energy across the valley to bless the crops, to calm agitated animals with a touch, to shield his home with fields of mirrored light. He no longer felt overwhelmed in crowds, for he had become aware of his auric limits and knew how to maintain their boundaries. At times, the practices were demanding. Old fears rose to the surface. Subtle addictions to chaos or anxiety attempted to creep back in. But with each challenge, Elias returned to center, sealed his energy, and continued. One evening, while meditating under the stars, he felt the presence of others, energies he could not see but could sense distinctly. Ancients, perhaps, guides. Their vibration was vast and kind. "You are not alone," they seemed to say. The forest became a cathedral, the wind a hymn. Elias wept, not from sadness but from the overwhelming beauty of remembering. And so the journey deepened. Not long after, the villagers began to notice changes. The sick healed faster after speaking with Elias. The children gathered around him, calmer in his presence. Even the animals responded with trust. Yet Elias sought no recognition. He knew the source was not him, but what moved through him. He had simply become a clearer vessel. One morning, a young woman arrived in the village, lost and afraid. Her energy was frayed, scattered. Elias welcomed her and taught her how to breathe, to center. She began to recover. She would become his first student. And just like that, the cycle continued. As the teacher had once guided Elias, he now became the guide. In the stillness of the forest, beneath the canopy of stars, Elias whispered the words he had learned through experience, not theory. Seal, center, protect, project, align. The energy moved. The world listened. And the path continued to unfold. The master simply nodded. "Then the next teachings will not come from me, but from the world itself. Watch, listen, shape, but above all remain centered. For even the stars lose their way when they forget their axis." And so Kale descended the mountain, not as the boy who once feared shadows, but as one who carried a sun within.